My wife called me boring to cover her affair. I need excitement, she smirked. Days later. My next move made her collapse, in desperation. The first fissure in my marriage was not caused by yelling or banging doors shut. A laugh was its origin. A small laugh that was full of scorn and contempt, almost cruel in its dismissiveness, came out of Sophia's mouth during a cookout that we had on a Saturday evening with some of our friends. I was in the middle of narrating a story that involved my job. It wasn't anything too big. It was simply a small moment that put smiles on everyone else's faces. Then, all of a sudden, she interjected by saying that Finn doesn't really do exciting stuff. He is steady. Without a doubt. It struck with greater force than it ought to have. Although everyone chuckled in a courteous manner, I could feel my cheeks begin to heat up, and my fingers were fidgeting with my cup. This is not due to a sense of embarrassment. I had gotten used to swallowing that a long time ago, but this time around, there was something new behind her tone, something piercing, something remote. That was then I realized that her emotions went beyond just unhappiness. From what was she pulling away and continuously retreating? From me or from anybody else? I did not inquire at that point in time. I simply gave a small, strained grin and let the discussion to progress. However, as I laid beside her while she browsed through her phone endlessly later that night, the screen was turned away from my direction. The calm conviction made its way down to my very bones, and I could feel it there. Her personality has been altered by something, or someone. We led a life of simplicity. My employment was at a warehouse that specialized in automotive parts. Extended work periods with consistent scheduling. She was employed in the field of marketing for a real estate agency, located in the city center. Only in the evenings did our schedules coincide with one another. And even then, she had been returning to her residence later and later, carrying with her that little scent of citrus perfume that was not familiar to me. According to her, it was from the office. I simply observed, and did not engage in any sort of argument. She would welcome me with extended embraces, playful pecks on the cheek, and inquiries about how my day was going. At this point, she flung her luggage onto the couch and said, "I'm tired," before vanishing into long baths or venturing out onto the balcony for calls she never took in my presence. However, the most significant difference was to her eyes. When she would gaze into my eyes, they would become less hard. They were now flickering with impatience. I attempted to make up, devised intimate evening plans, prepared her favorite dishes, and even came up with ideas for her to do over the weekend. She consistently refused, citing the same indistinct reason. All I require is some room. A short and memorable phrase that is used in advertising. You are causing me to feel overwhelmed. An experience that is beyond one's capacity to deal with. Even though I did not see her very well, I did my best to remain calm. I observe patterns. And patterns are not deceptive. It was always the case that whenever she claimed that she was too tired for me, she would suddenly find the energy to get dressed, curl her hair, apply perfume, and make her way to the workplace for some additional work. Figuring out what that meant did not require me to have detective-like skills. However, I did not approach her because I would not be able to obtain the truth if I confronted her. However, silently observing her would be another story. She was getting ready to complete a late project when, one night, she left her iPad on the bed. Typically, she treated her devices with the same level of caution as if they contained nuclear codes. However, she made a mistake and slipped up that evening. There was a sneak peek of the message. A man's name, a heart emoji, and the time and place that were all visible on the screen. I had a sudden, sharp intake of breath. Not due to shock, but more due to the fact that the subdued suspicion that I had been harboring had crystallized into reality. She was more than merely aloof. Simply being bored does not adequately describe how she was feeling. She was under the impression that I would never realize that she was constructing a whole new life for herself. The tablet was not touched by me. I choose to take a picture of the preview instead. Minor, delicate, yet significant enough for me to be able to recall myself in the future that this was not psychosis on my part. This is how it all started. She woke up with a radiant appearance the following morning, despite not having had sufficient rest. The way that a person shines when the things that they want are being fulfilled somewhere else than where they are. With a tone that was light and casual, she stated that she would be staying late at work once more. She made her coffee, hummed a tune to herself, and then made the declaration. At that point in time, my heart became fixed in its position. It is great if she desired excitement, if she thought that I was predictable, or if she considered that I would never be anything more than a calm, uninteresting man. Allow her to hold this belief. This is due to the fact that while she was chasing after cheap thrills, I was quietly getting something ready that she would never be able to forget. Such a fact, which was so absolute and indisputable, and which had been so meticulously put together, that it would strike every individual in her vicinity with the force of a blow when it came. It was not my intention to elevate the volume of my voice. Begging was not something that I intended to do. I had planned to watch, collect, document, prepare, and when the time came, I would bring a reckoning that she would not expect. That evening, Sophia exited the apartment while wearing a navy-colored outfit that I had never before laid eyes on. It is far too new to have been something that she purchased for use in her job. While she was getting into a gray SUV that did not belong to any of her coworkers, she was unaware that I was watching her from the window. She was unaware that my phone had the capability to record each and every license plate number, timestamp, and further information. Furthermore, she was unaware that the fact that she had disregarded this husband as being uninteresting, was precisely the point at which he had already began to unravel the threads of her secret life. For several days, I was in a state of being a person who was essentially divided in two. I flawlessly fulfilled my duties in all outward respects. Serene, tranquil, unfazed, and even willing to lend a hand. I nodded in understanding, and offered to prepare a warm meal for her when she returned home past her usual time, yawning involuntarily, and giving vague accounts of missed deadlines. I washed the dishes as she remained in the bathroom for hours with her phone. I merely tied the scarf around her neck for her, and expressed my hopes that she would have a good day when she told me that she was going to leave early for team meetings. However, something altogether else was taking place behind the scenes. She logged in promptly for each meeting that she attended into the late hours. She disappeared into each business dinner she attended, leaving a mark. I observed her reflection in the balcony door as she went outside to make each phone call, and it was recorded in quiet. I had stopped making guesses. I was putting together the truth, one component at a time. I did not have an angry demeanor. At this point in time, no. The work that I was required to complete would have been compromised by anger. I had to maintain a consistent, undetectable, and foreseeable presence. That very thing that she made fun of ended up becoming my most powerful tool. The very first assurance that was legitimate came on an evening during the week that happened to be Friday. She did not remember to silence her phone. A message appeared and began to light up just as she was brushing her hair in the mirror. It's the same location we went to the previous time. I made a reservation for the accommodation, a space for relaxation rather than for dining or meetings. This particular space is referred to as. For a moment that lasted half a second, her hand was completely still, long enough for her to demonstrate that she was aware that she ought not to be smiling. That faint, intimate smile that she attempted to conceal in the mirror was burnt into my brain. She put the phone away when she had finished typing on it at a rapid pace. She was unaware that I had seen every single one of the letters. Everything became clearer and more distinct starting at that point in time. She decided to cease wearing her wedding ring while she was at work, and I took notice of it. The way in which she purchased a fresh bottle of perfume, spritzed it on before she departed, but then washed as soon as she came home. The way in which she protected her phone as if it were a covert life support machine. The way in which she found herself with brand new lingerie receipts jammed into the back pocket of her pocketbook all of a sudden. Every single particularity is a separate narrative line. And I continued to pull. I retained the services of a private investigator named Edward, who was an elderly gentleman who was quiet and non-curious. He simply shook his head slowly as I elaborated on the specifics of the job I wanted him to do. I instructed him to ensure that everything was above board, and to maintain a clean record. There is only proof. There are no risks. And there are no dangerous traps. Every single instance in which she believed that I would not be able to see it, I have provided her with evidence that is both convincing and indisputable. He was able to provide pictures of her climbing into the SUV. Footage of her, accompanied by a man wearing a charcoal suit entering a hotel located in the city center. A hard copy of the official document that certifies his marriage, indeed, matrimony. Photographic evidence of the texts that they sent to each other. Security camera footage showing static images of them in the corridors, making eye contact with each other. There is no swapping of colleagues. Henry Carter was the man's name, and he was 42 years old. He was married to Laura Carter, and they had 2 daughters together. As an employee in the office, she works as a regional director. A man who removed his wedding band on the same evenings that Sophia removed hers. Each of the new folders that Edward gave to me was both a source of pain and an odd sensation of relief. That meant that I was not just imagining things. That meant that the issue did not stem from me. This implied that the reason she had been pulling away from me was not due to my shortcomings. The reason was that she was in pursuit of something that was both reckless and unlawful, something that she thought she could conceal under a veil of obscurity and justifications. However, I found something even more sinister when I progressed farther in my investigation. This was not something that had not happened before. Before I had any inkling that something was amiss, their messages stretched back months in time. Discussions held at all hours of the night over the subject of why enthusiasm feels greater than loyalty. Sending each other flirtatious texts on our anniversary. Photographs that she forwarded to him, after she informed me that she was too exhausted to engage in conversation. And to top it all off, there was one message from her to him that said, "He's harmless. He'll never do anything. He's too boring to even question me." Boring. Once more. This time, I was not broken by it. It stole from me. This is due to the fact that there is nothing more dangerous than a man who is silent, watchful, and underestimated. Once I had closed the last folder, I found that I was no longer experiencing feelings of grief. I experienced a sense of clarity. Clarity of the sort that burns gently, slowly, but ultimately. I did not wish to face her. At this point in time, no. Chaos results from confrontation. Confusion conceals what is actually happening. In a state of confusion, those who engage in dishonest behavior have the opportunity to manipulate the narrative, alter the sequence of events, and unjustly accuse the innocent. Instead, I made myself smaller, quieter, and nearly unnoticeable in her presence. She made the mistake of believing that stillness indicated a lack of strength. However, it was a deliberate decision. She strolled across the room while humming to herself and grinning at her phone, behaving as though the entire world had bestowed a remarkable gift onto her. Each falsehood that she spun for me got increasingly effortless and polished. The idea that she was invulnerable was a belief that she held. She held the belief that the shadows were there to safeguard her. The fact that she was unaware of was that shadows appear to take on a different form when someone is observing them from a different perspective. She returned home at a late hour the day before everything came crashing down, once again emanating a bright light. "You have such a kind heart," she added. "You never question anything. And I value that. Value. She removed her heels with a kick before giving a slow smile. It was as if I were nothing more than a convenience, a placeholder, a quiet observer of my own betrayal. However, she was unable to perceive the disparity that was reflected in my eyes. She did not seem to take note of the fact that I was no longer consuming pain medication. I was committing her face to memory, in anticipation of the storm that she had no idea was approaching. If excitement was what she was after, she was going to be stunned in a way that she had never before imagined. It would not be loud, nor would it be aggressive, but it would be devastating because it would be the truth presented to the one set of people she never wanted to disappoint. Her parents, his wife, everyone who had faith in the fact that she led a life that was stable and respectable, and she would discover precisely how unpredictable I was. It was on that morning when everything changed. It was an odd sense of tranquility that it evoked. Excessively serene. It was as if the universe was providing me with a brief respite from all things prior to the moment that everything ultimately exploded. Sophia had departed prior to this moment in order to go to her place of employment. After having left a trail of the fragrance's aroma, she only made reservations when it was for her late projects. With a tune on her lips, she stepped out the door. She was completely oblivious that the quiet man whom she assumed she was in control of had spent the entire night preparing the ultimate blow. Sunlight was pouring over the surface of the table when I took a seat at it in the kitchen. My laptop opens, and all of the evidence that I have gathered is carefully organized into files. There are screenshots, videos, timestamps from the hotel, copies of her texts, and images of her getting into Henry's car. The same grin that she once had when she was with me can be seen on her face, soft and familiar. It was no longer painful to get stung. I had already passed through that phase by now. Everything came across as if it were operating on automatic pilot. At around 1 o'clock in the morning, the private investigator by the name of Edward had completed the delivery of the final file. The first time that he had hesitated since we began collaborating, it was when he passed it over to me. In a hushed tone, he inquired, "Are you absolutely certain that you want to proceed with this?" I did not pause to reconsider my decision. Indeed, this is because there are instances when silence does not constitute forgiveness. The silence is a form of preparation. At this point, all I had left to do was relay the truth to the appropriate individuals. My first stop was Laura Carter, the wife of Henry Carter. It was her right to find out, and this was not out of wrath or cruelty. No woman should have to endure living in a lie when her spouse is pretending to be someone else in the privacy of their own house. I wrote a first version of an email. Just the facts, nothing sensational, and nothing sentimental. You have a right to know what really happened, Laura, and that is why I am sending this to you. I waited for a moment after hovering over the connected files, before pressing the transmit button. I felt a subtle change come over me when the email left my outbox, as if an old door were shutting. Following them were the parents of Sophia, John Harris, and Zoe Harris. Two individuals who had faith in the fact that their daughter was a paragon of virtuousness and elegance. I was aware that this would cause them to be devastated, but they also deserved to know the truth, so they adored her. I made sure that I packed the evidence in a meticulous manner, and included a brief and consistent message. I am disclosing this information with you because I think that being truthful is preferable to being silent. I made no accusations. I did not say anything disrespectful about their child. I only demonstrated to them what she had been up to for a number of months. I hit the transmit button. The email address to which the final message was sent was the personal email address that Henry Carter used exclusively for communications with his family, the man who robbed his wife and children of precious time, in order to pursue thrills with me. I have appended a single compilation file. Not all of the details, just enough so that he can plainly see his own reflection. After that, I shut the laptop and reclined. It was completed. There were no cries of anger, no shouting matches, and no confrontations that may be interpreted as fault. There was only the straightforward, unambiguous, and unequivocal delivery of the truth. I had presented her with just the thing that she had expressed a desire for. A sense of excitement enveloped her, but this was a type of excitement that she had not anticipated. My phone began to buzz as the late morning approached. The first thing that happened was that I received a phone call from a number that was not familiar to me. I did not respond to you, Laura. Following that, Sophia received a series of text messages from her mother. Lengthy passages that are punctuated with incredulity. Is this actually happening, Finn? When did this all begin? What was the reason for you withholding this information from us until now? While I calmly read each one, I allowed the emotional burden of their astonishment to sink in somewhere that was distant from my heart. Following that, it was Sophia who placed the phone calls. 3 in a row, then 4, and then 8. I did not answer the phone when it rang. I wanted her to remain seated in the state of perplexity until she was fully aware of the reality. The door to my apartment suddenly swung open by itself at approximately 12 o'clock. It is quite probable that she pleaded with the building management to allow her in that morning, because she had misplaced her key. Breathless, with her voice quivering from an emotion that was something between fear and wrath, she shouted out, "Finn, I did not respond to you when you were in the kitchen." I held off till she walked into the room, and saw that the laptop was still open on the table made of wood. The last email that she had sent was still shown on the screen, and her eyes were fixed on it, taking in the bright blue characters that were printed there. In an instant, all the color left her face. She cautiously approached and in a hushed tone asked, "What is this?" Her voice trembled as she spoke. She was not panicking because of me. "What did you do, Finn? Why did you send?" she exclaimed. Our marriage was not the reason behind it. Her image, her reputation, and the life that she had meticulously crafted were all at stake. I did not indulge her by allowing an explosion to occur. I refrained from shouting or insisting on an explanation. I just leaned back against the counter with my arms crossed, and watched as she fell apart. In a subdued voice, I stated, "You were seeking for thrills." She shook her head in a fast manner, her hands trembling as she reached for the laptop. "I think starting with honesty would be a good idea," she said. She wouldn't have kept it secret for months if it didn't have any significance. "You can't. Finn. You shouldn't have done that. This isn't what you think it is. This is. You weren't supposed to do that. This didn't mean anything." She wouldn't have gone out and purchased outfits exclusively for him if he didn't mean anything to her. She wouldn't be trembling uncontrollably at this moment if it had no significance. I responded in a composed manner by saying, "That is something that you will have to work out with them. Your parents, his wife, his family. I'm done carrying it." She covered her mouth, her eyes welling with tears. The type that originates from the state of panic that results from being exposed. Not the calm and peaceful type. Once more, her phone rang while she walked back and forth across the living room. It is her mother. Sophia's mother did not appear to be prepared to listen to any sort of clarification, as seen by the volume that was coming out of the speaker. Trembling, she responded with the words, "Mom, I can explain." But Sophia only stared at the screen, horrified, before she spoke. At this point in time, no. She was insisting on receiving answers, insisting on being told the truth, and insisting on being informed as to how it was possible for her daughter to betray not only her husband, but also the ones who had the most faith in her. Sophia felt her knees start to buckle. With her forehead clutched by one hand as though she were attempting to maintain her bodily integrity, she made her way to the couch and gradually sank herself into it. The moment that she directed her gaze in my direction, it was difficult to hear what she was saying. I looked her directly in the eyes, and maintained the same tranquility that she had once misunderstood as a sign of weakness. "How could you do this to me?" "I didn't do anything to you, Sophia," I responded to her. "You are the one who did this?" "All I did was stop protecting the lie," she said, her breath catching in her throat. She gazed at me with the same intensity that she would have had if she were looking at me for the very first time. Someone who was very different from the uninteresting, foreseeable person she had before discarded, but rather someone whose capabilities she had severely underestimated. I experienced a sense of deep significance, welling up within me as she rushed to gather up bits that she had never anticipated dropping. Not vengeance, but rather closure. The intention here was not to penalize her. The primary goal was to liberate myself. And it had been functional. For several hours, Sophia was unable to stop shaking. She slumped down into the couch in a manner that was reminiscent of a person who has just witnessed the dramatic and gradual disintegration of their entire existence. The screen of her cell phone continued to light up. Not only her parents and her sister, but also co-workers who must have received pieces of information about what took place from the Daltons. Every little tremor caused her to instinctively recoil. I remained silent, allowing the burden to fall just where it was supposed to fall on her decisions. It was not long before the meticulously maintained equilibrium of her universe started to disintegrate. Another name showed on her caller ID approximately in the middle of the day, Laura Carter. The phone did more than just ring this time around. It was buzzing on account of its anger. There is no doubt that Laura has read everything. There is no doubt that every single piece of evidence has been viewed. She was undoubtedly aware that the marriage she had been making every effort to keep together was being destroyed by two individuals who played a game of hide and seek with their loyalty. Sophia remained silent in her response. She was not capable of doing so. Her gaze was fixed on the monitor, as though it were scorching her. "Finn, I'm going to lose everything," she murmured at last. There was a period in my life when such statement would have completely devastated me. This is a moment when I would have taken her hands to comfort her. At one point in time, I would have apologized for things that I did not do in order to maintain harmony. However, that man was no longer standing in front of her. "You lost everything the moment you walked away from what mattered," I explained in a calm manner. "You chose this, not me." Tears flowed down her cheeks at long last. Tears that came in heavy, irregular, and frenzied bursts as a result of the realization that she would be unable to undo what had been done. It was as if she believed that she had the authority to completely lose her composure in my arms as she grabbed for me. However, I took a step back. Before her hand gradually descended, it trembled as it hung suspended in the air. "Please, Finn. Please. We can fix this. I'll stop everything. I'll change my number. I'll talk to my parents. Just give me a chance to explain. Please elaborate." She had enough time at her disposal to provide an explanation for her late-night activities. It may take a few months to modify or clarify conduct. Months passed with no admission of the truth on her part. Her choice was to be thrilled. I gently whispered to her, "The thing that you are attempting to repair is no longer ours. It's yours, and you have to face it. I'm done carrying it." She swallowed back a sob while her chest grew constricted. "I didn't think you'd ever do something like this." "That's something that I'm aware of," I said in response. That was the problem. She had constructed her relationship on the basis that I would not speak out, that I would continue to act in a predictable manner, and that I would ignore whatever was going on indefinitely. She failed to realize the extent of what those who are reserved are capable of doing when they have reached their breaking point. She was finally able to confront her parents. She took hold of her coat and departed at approximately 4:30 in the afternoon. She did not cast a glance behind her. With a gentle click, the door shut behind her, and the apartment seemed to feel a little more spacious and lighter all of a sudden, as if it were no longer a place that was concealing any secrets in its corners. I approached the balcony and took a deep breath of the frigid air that filled my lungs. What I experienced was not joy. It was not a victory. It was something that was much quieter in nature. Feelings of relief. The reality could no longer be concealed. The dual existence that she had constructed had come to an end. The reason for this was that I had put an end to holding it up, not because of any destruction that I had done to it. On that particular evening, I packed a tiny bag. I was not fleeing from anything, but rather, I was in need of some breathing room, which was something she never granted me. I went to a hotel in the city center, checked in using my own name, and for the first time in a long time, slept through the night without having to wait for a door to be opened at midnight. I got a final message from her, the following morning. It was a lengthy text message that contained apologies, expressions of sorrow, uncertainty, and a desperate attempt to prevent me from going away. I made sure to pay close attention to every single word. I then switched off my phone, and I did it not because I was angry, but because I wanted to feel calm. Reconciling does not need entail resuming a relationship every single time. In certain cases, it involves moving on. Sophia desired a life that was filled with surprises and thrills. The reality eventually came to light and confronted her, which is how she came to learn of the situation, rather than from another man. In addition, I was able to finally receive what I was due. The awareness that being uninteresting was not the issue, along with a fresh beginning, and a conscience that was rid of guilt. Putting one's faith in an untrustworthy individual. I'd paid for my sister's rent for years, but when I uncovered my father's affair with my aunt and his business fraud. I reported them to the IRS. A day later, they were broke and begging me for mercy. This whole issue began approximately 2 years ago, and I'm a 30-year-old man. To make anything make sense, though, I suppose I need first explain a few things. On paper, we were essentially the ideal family, as everyone would say. Immediately following his marriage to my mother, Linda, my father, Michael, a 50-year-old man whom everyone called Mike, founded this construction business. 22 years had passed since their marriage. Mom is from a large Connecticut Catholic family. In the past, her 4 sisters were very close, even finishing each other's words. When I was growing up, Julie, her younger sister, was constantly present. She was that cool aunt who would cover for me when I did stupid teenage things and sneak me extra dessert. We had a lovely home in Lexington that was comfortable, but not extremely wealthy. When I was about 12, Dad's business really took off, and all of a sudden we were living comfortably. Disney World family vacations every other year, brand new automobiles, etc. Mom was very active in religious activities, and organized large charity events that were well known throughout the community. Aunt Julie was a kindergarten teacher at the neighborhood elementary school, and because she was so amazing with the children, all of the parents adored her. We would always have these enormous family dinners on Sundays. Unless you were actually in the hospital, everyone had to be present. All of my aunts would bring their particular foods, and Dad would light up his nice grill, the one he spent much too much money on but wouldn't acknowledge it. Everybody fought over Julie's delicious mac and cheese every time. On a Sunday, perhaps 4 months prior to everything happening, my cousin Ethan, Julie's child, made a joke about how his mother was constantly texting someone these days. Julie became quite strange about it and said it was only work-related. Immediately after that, Dad knocked over his drink. Even though I didn't see the warning signs at the time, I will always remember the day it all went south. We had our yearly Memorial Day cookout. Everyone was present. All of my cousins, aunts, uncles, and even a few of my neighbors. Every time we had a big picnic, people would come and go all day. Dad was acting strangely the entire time. Strangely, he kept checking his phone, and left to answer business calls. Even though it was Memorial Day. What kind of construction is taking place on Memorial Day? It was really strange for Julie to be late because she typically arrives first to assist with setup. She was agitated when she arrived, and claimed that our suburb was congested on Memorial Day. Yes. To assist with carrying some food out, she set her phone down on the table. That's when it occurred. At the age of 15, my cousin Ethan reached for what he believed to be his phone. Their blue iPhone case was identical, or whatever. He was going to show his girlfriend some TikTok. But, man, they were there when he opened it. My dad and Julie exchanged hundreds of mails. Not just standard communications, but also explicit content, images, and meeting schedules. They were told that they were destined to be together, and that they would soon find a way to notify everyone. In the backyard, Ethan lost it and began yelling at his mother. He simply held up the phone and began reading texts aloud, as everyone rushed to see what was happening. What followed was unlike anything I've ever seen. It was my cousin shouting. My aunts were in tears. Julie's husband, my uncle David, appeared to be about to vomit. As I watched this nightmare play out in real time, I stood still. I never imagined my father would get this far. He and my mother, after all, had been my pillar of support, my safety net, and the one thing I believed I could always rely on. However, I had to stuff my hands into my pockets because they were shaking so much. And I experienced an odd sense of detachment, as if I were watching someone else's family disintegrate on TV instead of seeing my own life come apart. The wailing and shouting weren't even the worst part. It was the brief period of silence that followed Ethan's completion of the last message. Then Julie made this noise. It was something between a sob and a giggle, and then it all blew out. It dawned on me at that point. Really got to me in the stomach. After this, our family will never be the same. Once something breaks, it's impossible to put it back together. And my mother My mother. My mother. My mother. Just stood there. Locked in place. While Julie attempted to take the phone from Ethan, she continued to hold this platter of potato salad in her hands and stare at nothing. No one even bothered to pick up the potato salad as it simply fell off the platter. That's what comes to mind the most. This potato salad blob was resting in the grass while my whole family fell apart. Dad attempted to explain that it wasn't what it appeared to be. Isn't it classic? However, Julie broke down in tears and said they had no intention of it happening. They were unsure of how to tell anyone that they had fallen in love. Julie even dared to admit in front of everyone, including her mother, that she and her father had a genuine bond that was undeniable for a long time. I can still hear my mother's voice. She made this strange gasping sound, as if someone had suddenly shoved her underwater. But it wasn't really a cry or a scream. After that, she simply turned around, entered her room, and locked the door. Although we were unaware of it at the time, it was likely the last time she would be herself for a very long time. Of course, that was the end of the BBQ. With the exception of Catherine, my mom's eldest sister, who stayed to attempt to speak with her through the door. Everyone went. To give everyone time to gather their thoughts, Dad packed up his belongings and departed. Ethan screamed after Julie as she fled outside sobbing, and I spent hours sitting on our back patio, looking at that dumb potato salad on the floor, trying to figure out how my entire existence had suddenly collapsed in about 12 minutes. After the cookout, the following few days were just bizarre, like a weird limbo where no one knew what to do. Mom would only leave her room to use the restroom, and even then, she would wait until she believed I was asleep. At night, I could hear her pacing and walking back and forth for hours on end. Sometimes when I checked later, the food I had left outside her door was gone, but most of the time it was still there. Dad never stopped messaging and calling me. He was sending lengthy texts about how life may be complicated, and that things aren't always clear-cut while he was lodging at a motel in Cambridge. That's what you're going with, really? He even made an effort to persuade me that he and Julie had battled their feelings for years before coming to the conclusion that they were soulmates. Wanted me to know that it wasn't a cheap affair, as if it somehow improved the situation. Even horrible was Julie. She began to arrive to our house at random times, and utilized the bedroom door to try to explain things to Mom. I had to practically threaten to call the police to get her to leave, because she would stand there sobbing and screaming things like, "But you have to understand, Linda. When love is real, you can't fight it." She would simply lie there, sobbing or gazing blankly. My dad, meanwhile, doesn't give a damn. He was already playing house with Julie. Together, they used funds from Dad's business to purchase an apartment. Julie abruptly became too stressed to work as a teacher, so she quit. They began sharing content on social media about choosing happiness and making a fresh start. The way they began distributing their version of events throughout the town was the worst part. Julie informed everyone at church that Mom's cold and aloof behavior had alienated Dad. Said that Mom neglected Dad since she was preoccupied with her charitable work. It was even implied that Mom had been aware of them for months but chose to play the victim by pretending not to notice. Julie's son, Ethan, was going through a really difficult period. He refused to visit his mother and lived full-time with his father, Julie's ex-partner. However, Julie also misrepresented that, claiming that I had poisoned Ethan in order to harm her and her father. Like, Julie, no. When you ruined our families, I'm very sure you did it alone. It became evident at the end of the first month that Mom would not be returning home anytime soon. We visited another mental health hospital. After the physicians suggested a longer-term care facility, I had to get some of her belongings and carry them there. And it broke my heart to find clothing for her. Her Sunday church dress, her gardening trousers, and her favorite sweater were all just hanging in the closet like nothing was wrong, as if she would return at any moment to don them once more. I realized at that point that nothing would ever be normal again. The individuals who had ruined our family had already moved on, as if nothing had occurred. After Mom went to the hospital, life fell into this strange rhythm as the rest of us tried to pick up the bits that had been shattered. Every Wednesday and Sunday after work, I would go see her. According to the doctor, she would feel more stable if she followed a regular schedule. Initially, she would merely nod or shake her head during visits rather than saying much. However, after 4 months or so, Mom began to have good days when she would genuinely look at me when I discussed my job or my cousin's situation. Then Julie made her first shocking revelation. She shared a picture of a sonogram along with the entire thing on Facebook. Pregnant with twins, not simply pregnant. God's blessings, love finding a way, and how thrilled she and her father were the main topics of the message. She tagged everyone we knew, including some of Mom's church acquaintances and her sisters. Who does that? My cousin Claire later told me that Julie had actually stopped taking birth control months before the affair was discovered. She informed Claire that she was praying for an accident because she believed having a child would force Dad to leave Mom. I guess she got exactly what she wanted. When Dad learned of the pregnancy, he went absolutely crazy, began referring to the twins as their miracle babies, and sharing daily updates about his expanding family. He even had the audacity to message me and ask if I would be interested in helping them set up the nursery in their new home. Yes, they used the funds from his firm to purchase this enormous property in Newton. The amount of money my father was making from that firm astounded me. For example, the building industry was doing all right, but it wasn't purchasing homes worth millions of dollars. When Mom learned she was pregnant, her physicians had to change her medication. For a while, she stopped eating once more. Ethan's visits to her were the only thing that appeared to make a difference. He was also in pain, so it seemed as though she could take hearing about his life. Dad and Julie, however, wouldn't let me be alone. They continued to arrive at my apartment without warning. With her palm on her belly, Julie would stand there and talk about how the twins would need their big brother and how families must support one another during happy times. The woman was acting as like we should all be celebrating after ruining her sister's life. When she was around 6 months pregnant, the true insanity began. After the twins were delivered, she started calling me several times a day to ask for help. Said that she and her father needed someone to watch the kids 3 days a week because they were so busy with their business. She would email me lengthy guilt trips about how children are innocent and how I was punishing kids for adult issues when I didn't return her calls. Then Emma and Ethan, the twins, were born. Julie also began sending me photos of the twins every day, along with phrases like missing their big brother or waiting for Uncle David to come meet them. When that didn't work, she started sending them videos of themselves sobbing along with statements suggesting that they felt their family wasn't complete. It was outright manipulation of emotions. When they began to appear at my job, it was the worst. During my lunch break, Julie would come with the twins and weep in the lobby over the high cost of childcare and their need for family support. My coworkers were really uneasy. Even though my supervisor volunteered to call security a few times, I was concerned that it would only make things worse. Dad attempted a different strategy. He began discussing the possibility of me becoming a company partner, stating that he wanted a trustworthy person to assist with management while he concentrated on his new family. Claimed that if I came to work with them and support the twins, he would offer me a 25% share. In retrospect, given my knowledge of the industry, that offer makes me giggle. They even enlisted others to exert pressure on me. Julie would complain to churchgoers that I was ignoring my own siblings, and that I was allowing jealousy to sour my relationships with defenseless kids. In fact, a few religious women visited my apartment to offer me advice on forgiveness and family responsibilities. I continued encountering these individuals who attempted to lecture me, so I had to move to a new grocery shop. But it was Julie's comparison of herself to Mom that really got to me. She would say things like, "I'm being a better mother than Linda ever was. And at least I'm emotionally available for my children." She even claimed that the twins were fortunate not to have their mother around because they were worthy of better than her instability. Her arrogance completely sickened me. Julie and her father had this entire scenario figured out by the time the twins were 5 months old. In order to give them some alone time, they requested that I take the twins every weekend. Claimed that it would be beneficial experience for when I had children of my own. Julie even began telling others that she was reserving a room for me in their home, as if she genuinely believed that I would want to join their dysfunctional little world. While these two pretended to be happy family despite the evidence of their treachery, I couldn't help but think of my mother lying in her hospital room, taking her medication, participating in group therapy, and gradually attempting to rebuild herself. I began to pay close attention to Dad's business documents at that point. Not because I had any plans at the time. The deed didn't even have Julie's name on it. Probably because Dad realized it would be simpler to track down the money if her name was on it. Before everything was made public, Julie and her father exchanged letters about how they could utilize the firm to launch their new lives. In reality, she was assisting him in transferring funds. There were lengthy email exchanges concerning opening new bank accounts and moving money around even before she started working there. They continued to try to coerce me into becoming a part of their lives. When I was discovering this information, Julie used to write me lengthy texts about how quickly the twins were developing and how I was losing out on important times. In the meantime, I'm sitting there examining proof that she assisted my father in stealing millions of dollars. The more I investigated, the clearer it appeared that this was more than a little tax evasion. Dad had been operating this entire scam scheme for years. He was using shell corporations to launder money, had fictitious workers on the payroll, and most likely placed individuals in danger by cutting corners on building supplies. Finding out that he had begun to ramp up the fraud about the time he began dating Julie was what really got me. As if he was aware that establishing his new life with her would require additional funds, he simply began stealing more as a result. When he bought Julie jewelry or took her on weekend vacations that Mom was unaware of, there were these significant increases in material expenditures. I began recording everything I discovered in a thorough log. Copies of every bank statement that showed the account movements were downloaded. Discovered these dubious offshore accounts that were created by Dad. In an attempt to evade taxes, he was transferring funds through them. I had been going to see my mother in the mental health facility all this time, watching her gradually try to piece her life back together, and these two were not only living off the fraud money, but also plotting to steal much more. I came to the realization that I could no longer ignore this fact. For the first time in their lives, they had to deal with the repercussions. I sat on this evidence for about a week, trying to decide what to do with it, although I knew it wouldn't be sufficient. There was a part of me that wanted to simply give it all to the IRS anonymously, and get it over with. It was imperative that these folks understood precisely who had brought them down and why. This odd Tuesday morning was the last straw. Julie arrived to my flat at 7 a.m., while I was getting ready for work. I didn't even send the first text. As soon as I opened the door, she forced her way inside with the twins, who were also crying. She was a complete mess, hadn't even combed her hair, and began to babble about their nanny's abrupt resignation. Very likely as a result of their improper payment of her. In retrospect, she required me to watch the twins for the next 3 days since she and her father had a crucial meeting with possible investors. She literally plopped down on my couch and wouldn't go when I told her no. began to cry, as they talked about how the twins needed stability, and how they were having trouble with the business, because no one wanted to support family anymore. I'm staring at these two infants the entire while she's speaking, unaware that their entire existence has been based on lies. I informed her that she had to go. At that moment, she took her phone out and put her father on speaker. He began to rant about how I was betraying the family, and how my mother would be very upset with me if I didn't support my siblings. That was all. That's when I lost it. I went to my workstation, took out one of the hard drives that contained everything I had collected, and just held it up while telling them that I knew all there was to know about the company, including the bribery, money laundering, and bogus firms. Julie's expression turned white. Dad's phone became quite quiet. Then Julie attempted to downplay it by claiming, "I was just confused about normal business practices." Dad intervened, attempting to explain how difficult it is to run a construction company, and how sometimes you have to get around rules in order to remain competitive. I'm fairly certain that bribing building inspectors isn't a typical business practice. I explained everything to them, Dad. I explained to them what I had discovered. Julie became agitated, and accused me of fabricating stories because I was envious of her new family. Dad went into threat mode and threatened to make sure I never worked in Boston again if I made a foolish move. I took out my phone at that point, and showed them the email I had previously written to the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, along with all of its attachments, and a thorough chronology of the crime. I informed them that I have duplicates of everything stored in several locations. Therefore, it was too late even if they attempted to destroy the proof. Julie went totally crazy. Began yelling that I was terrible for wanting to put their father in jail, and that I was attempting to ruin her children's future. The twins were crying, most likely because they were afraid of all the shouting. Still yelling that I would regret this, she took them and fled. For hours following that, Dad continued to text and call. Initially, they offered me money to help me forget what I had witnessed in an attempt to reason with me. He turned to threats when that failed. Claimed that he would tell everyone that I had assisted in the fraud, and that I had supported it for years. However, I had documentation proving that I hadn't worked for the corporation since my undergraduate summer jobs. I waited until precisely 9 in the morning. I sent the email with everything I had when the IRS offices opened. In case my father tried to drag me into it, I made sure to describe how I found out about it and my minimal involvement years ago. I then gave my Aunt Catherine a call and told her everything. With the exception of Julie, she conference phoned all of my other aunts. They were obviously shocked, though not very surprised by the scam. It seems that everyone was curious about how Dad and Julie were able to support their way of life. The days that followed were very demanding. The IRS wanted to schedule an interview and replied really promptly. Even though I hadn't done anything wrong, I hired a lawyer just to be sure. Both Dad and Julie made every effort to get in touch with me, including sending church members to my place. They continued creating fresh email addresses to get in touch with me even after I banned their phone numbers. Julie even attempted to message me, using phony social media accounts. Sometimes in the same message, they alternated between pleading, threatening, and guilt-tripping. I went to see my mother that evening. I haven't yet told her what I did. She wasn't prepared for that kind of stress, according to her doctor. However, when I entered, she genuinely grinned at me for the first time in a very long time. In some way, she sensed that things would shift at last. After I sent that email to the IRS, things happened far more quickly than I had anticipated. For example, I assumed that nothing would happen for months or even years. However, no. Everyone who had ever worked for Dad's company was being interviewed by IRS criminal investigators in less than 2 weeks. The raid on Dad's main office was the first indication that things were seriously going south. During their affair, Julie had been using the company's accounts to write checks to herself for consulting services. But in reality, she was using the money to pay for upscale hotels and expensive goods. When they were trying to conceive the twins, she had even paid for fertility treatments with corporate funds. Dad was offered a 5-year sentence by the prosecution if he assisted them in locating all the money. Given how quickly he accepted the arrangement, his attorney most likely advised him to accept it. However, Julie was left out of the agreement, since she attempted to delete evidence once the investigation had begun. Unaware that the feds already had copies of everything, she attempted to shred documents and erased numerous emails. Because of the twins, social services became engaged. Since Julie's ex-husband and his new wife had prior experience raising her child, Ethan, they temporarily placed them with them. When Julie learned, she went utterly crazy. It goes without saying that my dad's construction business failed. I regret that all of the honest workers lost their jobs. But the inquiry revealed that the majority of the new hires were merely names on paper. Dad was keeping the money for himself by claiming salary for non-existent persons. They took almost everything away from them, including their house, Julie's car, their main vacation, and all of their bank accounts. Ethan's stepmother was the sole reason the twins still had toys and clothing. Yes, Julie's ex-husband got married, packed up their belongings, and visited the property before it was confiscated. Therefore, the true drama was taking place in our extended family and community while Julie was handling her own legal issues and Dad was incarcerated in a federal facility. People I had known my entire life began to reveal their true selves as a result of this whole circumstance, which essentially divided everyone into factions. This private Facebook group was created by my mom's side cousin Claire, for the sake of family healing, or whatever. This entire area became a battle zone. In some way, Julie joined it, and began writing lengthy tirades about how everyone was ignoring her during her difficult time, and how her kids were suffering without their family network. The twins were actually getting along great with Julie's ex-husband and his wife, Kimberly. Since Kimberly works as a child psychologist, she was able to assist them with adjusting. Considering his initial feelings toward the circumstance, it was quite remarkable that Ethan was even beginning to form a bond with his half-siblings. However, witnessing her ex-husband rear her children once more was too much for Julie to bear. Kimberly was attempting to take her place as the twins' mother. She began to inform everyone. She even attempted to report them to CPS using fictitious allegations of abuse. However, the social worker saw right through it, especially since Kimberly had kept track of everything since the twins moved there. Watching Julie attempt to control Ethan during all of this was the worst part. She began to guilt-trip him by telling him that by failing to defend her in front of the family, he was deserting his brother and sister. In order to cope with everything, Ethan ultimately had to begin therapy. In the end, his father obtained a court order compelling Julie to cease speaking with Ethan directly. Then there were all these strangers emerging from the woods, claiming that Julie or Dad owed them money. For example, this person showed up at my flat claiming that his father had committed to fund his startup. Julie allegedly stole money from her to invest in the building company, according to another woman. As it turned out, they had been operating this whole hoax, obtaining investments from churchgoers. The logistics of it all aren't even the most difficult aspect. It's observing how this has radically altered our identities as individuals. Mom is doing better in therapy, but she now feels heavier than she did before. That's typical, according to the doctors. That recovery does not entail going back to your pre-trauma self. It entails coming to terms with what transpired, and constructing something fresh from the fragments left behind. I have no idea what our family will look like in the future. The previous iteration of ourselves has vanished, irreparably broken. But perhaps that's all right. From the ashes of what they destroyed, perhaps we may construct something more powerful. Something that excludes anyone who may cause such severe harm to their own family and still want us to go on. Ironically, my father instilled in me the values of accepting responsibility for one's actions, admitting one's faults, and dealing with the fallout. One prison day at a time. I suppose he's finally learning the lesson himself. For my part, I'm concentrating on Mom's recuperation, and letting the judicial system handle things. You shouldn't give such folks another chance to ruin your life. I'm concentrating on supporting my mother for the time being, and leaving the rest to the lawyers. Once destroyed, certain bridges should remain ashes. First of all, they continued discovering new problems with Dad's business operations, so his sentence might have been prolonged. A follow-up hearing regarding the fresh evidence they discovered was scheduled for next month, but it has been postponed. They discovered him in his cell 3 days ago. According to the official declaration, it was self-inflicted. I'm still having trouble understanding it. I haven't seen the letter yet, but the guard who discovered him indicated there was one. I am not certain if I want to. Julie has gone utterly insane. At 3 in the morning, she arrived at my apartment, yelling, "That's what I did to him." She would not stop screaming about how I ruined our family, and how I would always have to deal with this. I simply stood there and allowed everything to soak in. To be honest, I have no idea how to feel. For example, should I feel relieved, angry, or sad? In addition to destroying my mom's life and stealing millions of dollars, he was still my father. The individual who chose to have an affair with my aunt, and then assumed that everyone would just accept it, ruined our lives. The person who attempted to blame me for not wanting to play happy family with their children from an affair. Mom's response was surprising. She simply fell silent as I informed her, and then she murmured, "I forgive him. I forgive him. I forgive him. I forgive him." She said it was for herself, not for him or me, and claimed that holding on to her anger was impeding her ability to recover. According to her physicians, this is actually a very good step in her recuperation. The twins remain with Kimberly and Julie's ex. They'll most likely remain there for at least 2 or 3 years, because Julie is dealing with her own legal issues. With them, Ethan has been fantastic. Asserts that they shouldn't be responsible for their parents' actions. Mom is stronger than anyone anticipated, but her doctors are keeping a tight eye on her to make sure this doesn't cause a setback. She's even mentioning the possibility of returning home soon. Declares her desire to take back her life. Julie is still being prosecuted for her involvement in the company scam. Her attorney attempted to use her father's passing to win the judge over. But the prosecutor has emails that show she was the one who devised some of their plans. Does it make me a bad person to be relieved? While a part of me is depressed, another part of me thinks that perhaps everyone can now begin to move on from his attempts to control things from prison.